Malak Grant stepped into the towering glass building that housed Altara, one of the hottest tech startups in Silicon Valley. The lobby was buzzing with employees darting between the sleek, modern furniture and large screens displaying the company's latest achievements. Dressed in a well-fitted suit, Malik looked every bit the professional, though he moved with an air of calm that was uncommon in this fast-paced world. But beneath his composed exterior was a man on a mission, a man who understood that each interaction here would reveal something crucial for his objective. He made his way up to the 15th floor, where his new team was based. Malak had been assigned as a mid-level manager in operations, a role that in theory meant he'd be an integral part of the company's growth. But the more he'd read about the CEO and Altara's infamous culture, the more he knew this assignment would be anything but routine. Ethan Brooks, the company's founder, had cultivated an image as a bold visionary, someone who bent the rules to get results. Altara's public successes had always been accompanied by whispers of insider deals, unethical practices, and a toxic work culture masked by flashy perks and over-the-top parties. Malak's thoughts were interrupted by the clanging of voices as he reached the open workspace. Bright screens and sprawling whiteboards covered with notes filled the room. A group of employees gathered around a standing desk, and as Malak approached, they fell silent, eyeing him with a blend of curiosity and disinterest. "Hey, I'm Malak," he said, extending a hand to the nearest team member. But before she could respond, Ethan himself strode up, grinning and flanked by two senior managers. Ethan's charisma was unmistakable. He was tall and sharp-featured with an energy that filled the room and a laugh that seemed to echo even after it stopped. "Oh, so this is the new hire," Ethan announced, barely glancing at Malak. "Welcome, Mark, right?" "Malak," he corrected, his voice calm but firm. Ethan didn't acknowledge the correction, instead addressing the team. "All right, everyone, back to work. Malak here is going to help lighten your loads," he said with a smirk that suggested otherwise. "Let's make sure he feels welcome, without too much hand-holding." The team chuckled along with Ethan, and Malik could feel the weight of their dismissive glances. This wasn't unfamiliar territory for him. He'd seen these dynamics in different forms throughout his career. But here it was more pronounced, more blatant. Ethan turned back to Malik, a slight sneer tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'll let you get settled in. Just remember, we're a company of action here. We don't have time for, niceties." With that, Ethan walked off, his two lieutenants following close behind. Malik clenched his jaw but kept his expression neutral. He'd been briefed about Ethan's personality, but the man's arrogance was astonishing in person. Ethan hadn't even tried to hide his disdain. As Malik took his assigned seat, he began to get a clearer view of the inner workings of the team. Throughout the day, he introduced himself to his coworkers, offering a friendly approach despite the chilly reception. Each time, he was met with perfunctory responses or dismissive nods. At one point, a junior analyst approached him, but before they could exchange more than a greeting, a senior manager interrupted, redirecting the analyst to a task as if Malak didn't exist. The day dragged on with Malik given tasks far beneath his skill level: inventory checks, report formatting, and other menial duties that had little to do with his official role. But he completed each task with careful precision, making mental notes about the work culture and the lack of respect directed his way. The tension, he knew, was only building. By late afternoon, he'd nearly settled into his routine when he was called into a meeting. Ethan was already seated at the head of the conference table, flanked by a group of senior managers. They exchanged amused glances as Malik took his seat. "All right, team," Ethan started, leaning back with a self-satisfied smile. "We've got a new project coming up, and it's going to require all hands on deck. That includes you, Malak. Think you can handle it?" "Yes, I can," Malak replied, keeping his tone even. Ethan smirked, exchanging a look with the others. "Good. We've got some data sorting that's fallen through the cracks: deadlines, expenses, petty stuff. Why don't you get started on that? And let's see how well you keep up." Malik nodded, resisting the urge to call out the blatant disrespect. He'd done more complex work in his sleep, but he knew better than to take the bait. He accepted the assignment with a composed nod, letting the group bask in their imagined superiority. They thought he was beneath them, and he was fine with that for now. The evening wore on, and Malik stayed late, alone in the dimly lit office. As the other employees filed out, he immersed himself in the company's data, ostensibly fulfilling his data sorting task. But his real purpose went deeper than that. He was looking for patterns, anomalies, anything that might confirm the whispers surrounding Altara's questionable financial practices. His training as an FBI agent had prepared him for moments like these, where patience was paramount, and every second of observation mattered. As he sifted through digital records, Malik noticed peculiar discrepancies in the company's finances. Lavish expenses disguised as business development and transfers to offshore accounts flagged as vendor payments. The sheer scale of misappropriation hinted at something larger than individual greed. It pointed to systemic corruption. The next day brought more of the same, with Malik facing subtle jabs and dismissive glances from the team. They continued to keep him at arm's length, seemingly determined to undermine his presence in every interaction. During a meeting, he made a suggestion to streamline operations, but Ethan waved him off, redirecting the discussion to another manager who parroted Malik's idea as his own. The team laughed, applauding the suggestion as if it were original. Malik noted the slight, his expression never betraying his frustration. Then, as he was leaving the conference room, he overheard Ethan talking with another senior executive in the hallway. "Honestly, why did we even bring him in?" Ethan sneered. "This diversity stuff is just HR nonsense. It's not like he'll make it here anyway." Malik paused, lingering just out of sight. The words echoed in his mind, confirming what he already knew about the company's toxic environment. But his calm remained unshaken, his resolve deepening with every insult and dismissal. They were underestimating him in every way possible, and he intended to use that to his advantage. The day ended with another late night, Malik the only one left in the office. He'd begun documenting every interaction, creating a record of the discriminatory treatment he faced daily. This was more than an investigation into financial misconduct. It was becoming a case study in the hostile work culture Ethan had fostered. Malik understood that taking down Altara would mean not only exposing its financial crimes but also shining a light on the racism and elitism simmering beneath its polished surface. He returned to his work, digging deeper into the records, knowing that his mission was only beginning. Malik's second week at Altara was filled with more of the same: endless dismissals, patronizing glances, and minor assignments far beneath his capabilities. His suggestions were ignored, his emails often unanswered, and his presence treated as an afterthought in every meeting. It was as though his existence barely registered with the team, and Ethan's underhanded remarks continued, adding fuel to the hostile atmosphere. Despite the alienation, Malik maintained a neutral facade, diligently handling every menial task given to him. He knew his role in this operation extended far beyond the work outlined in his job description. His real purpose here was becoming increasingly clear with each day that passed, and he was willing to endure the indignities if it meant unraveling the layers of corruption. Late one evening, Malik stumbled upon a financial report that piqued his curiosity. The report, buried deep within a pile of outdated files, detailed an unusually high expense allocated to a business development initiative in Southeast Asia. The numbers didn't add up. The expense seemed too excessive, especially for a project that hadn't shown any tangible returns. Malik cross-referenced it with the company's other reports and found even more peculiarities. Large sums marked as marketing costs were allocated to untraceable vendors, and many expense reports were incomplete or missing crucial details. There was a pattern emerging, one that pointed to systematic misuse of funds. The next morning, Malik broached the topic subtly in a team meeting, suggesting a financial audit to track expenses more effectively. As expected, his idea was met with immediate resistance. "An audit?" Ethan chuckled dismissively. "Come on, Malik. We're not the IRS here. Our focus is growth, not penny pinching. We've got better things to worry about." Malik kept his expression neutral, but inside he took note of Ethan's reaction. The CEO's casual dismissal of financial accountability was not just arrogance, it was a red flag. The more Malik observed, the more he realized that Ethan's power over the team was rooted in a toxic culture of fear and blind loyalty. The senior managers, each eager to prove their worth to Ethan, mirrored his behavior, maintaining the facade of respect while ignoring ethical boundaries. Later that day, Malik was called into Ethan's office. Ethan sat behind a massive glass desk, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "I hear you've been curious about our finances," Ethan said, his tone laced with veiled irritation. "I'm just trying to understand our processes," Malik replied, keeping his voice calm. "If we're going to optimize operations, it's important to know where we're allocating resources." Ethan leaned back, tapping a pen against his desk. "Look, Malik, I appreciate initiative, but around here, we trust each other to do what's necessary. We're not interested in micromanaging or questioning everyone's work. Got it?" "Understood," Malik replied, masking his frustration. Ethan's gaze lingered on Malik for a moment longer, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good. Now focus on what you're here to do, and leave the bigger decisions to us." With that, Malik was dismissed, and as he walked back to his desk, he knew the walls of this company were much darker than they appeared. Ethan's arrogance and sense of invincibility only solidified Malik's resolve. The more Altara tried to hide, the more determined he became to expose everything lurking beneath the surface. Over the following days, Malik stayed late into the night, carefully combing through Altara's digital archives. He developed a routine: retrieve files, cross-reference them with other documents, and save the significant ones in an encrypted folder on his laptop. It was meticulous work, but his efforts soon began to pay off. He found records of offshore accounts, funds directed to shell companies, and inflated contracts. The entire operation was so elaborate it had to involve multiple senior-level employees. Malik was in the middle of reviewing yet another suspicious contract when a young analyst, Erin, stopped by his desk. She looked around cautiously before leaning in to speak. "Hey, Malik," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Malik glanced up, surprised. "For what?" Erin shifted nervously. "For the way everyone's been treating you. It's not right. You don't deserve it." Malik offered a faint smile, touched by her sincerity. "Thanks, Erin. It means a lot to hear that." She hesitated, then glanced around again, lowering her voice. "Look, I don't know what you're really here for, but if you're looking into the finances, be careful. There's a lot going on around here that people don't talk about." Malik nodded slowly. "I appreciate the heads up. Do you know anything specific?" Erin shook her head, her expression guarded. "Just rumors. People say Ethan's got connections in high places. That's why nobody dares question him. But there's something off. And every time someone tries to dig deeper, they either quit or get fired." "Thanks, Erin," Malik said, sensing the fear in her voice. "I'll keep that in mind." As Erin walked away, Malik's suspicion only grew stronger. The fear Ethan instilled in his employees was not just about job security, it was about self-preservation. Ethan had woven a web of intimidation that ensured silence, allowing him to manipulate finances without consequence. But Malik knew that every web could be untangled, no matter how well spun. The breakthrough Malik had been waiting for came one night when he accessed a hidden folder on the company's network labeled Vendor Relations. Inside, he found a series of emails between Ethan and a shell company registered offshore. The emails discussed adjustments to financial reports and detailed payment arrangements that pointed to money laundering. Malik felt a surge of vindication. This was the smoking gun he needed: proof that Ethan was siphoning money out of the company and laundering it through fake accounts. The next morning, Malik arrived at the office with renewed focus, fully aware that he was playing a dangerous game. The closer he got to the truth, the more precarious his position became. Ethan's growing suspicion was evident, and Malik knew it was only a matter of time before the CEO's hostility turned into direct confrontation. As Malik worked through his tasks, Ethan called an impromptu meeting. The team gathered in the glass-walled conference room, where Ethan stood at the head of the table, exuding his usual arrogance. "I've been hearing whispers about people poking their noses where they don't belong," Ethan said, his gaze settling on Malik. "I want to remind everyone that we have a hierarchy here for a reason. If anyone has concerns, they should bring them to me or our senior team, not go around causing trouble." Malik met Ethan's gaze steadily, unflinching. He knew this warning was meant for him, but he refused to be intimidated. Ethan's smirk faltered slightly, perhaps realizing that Malik wasn't cowed by his words. But Malik kept his expression neutral, unwilling to give Ethan the satisfaction of a reaction. After the meeting, Ethan confronted Malik in the hallway. His smile was gone, replaced by a hard glare. "You're not here to rock the boat, Malik," he said, his tone low and menacing. "I can make things very uncomfortable for people who don't understand their place." Malik nodded slowly, his expression impassive. "I'm just doing my job." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Then stick to it. Consider this your last warning." As Ethan walked away, Malik knew the confrontation was inevitable. Ethan's desperation was starting to show, and the CEO's grip on the company was slipping. But Malik remained calm, knowing he was close to uncovering the full extent of Ethan's operations. That night, Malik sent a secure message to his FBI contact, detailing his findings and requesting a backup plan in case Ethan's paranoia escalated. He was operating on borrowed time, but he had all the evidence he needed to take down the corrupt CEO and his loyalists. The endgame was approaching, and Malik knew that one final push would expose Ethan and Altara's inner workings to the world. As Malik settled into his role at Altara, he could feel the tension in the office building up each day. Ethan's hostility toward him had only intensified, and Malik was sure that the CEO suspected something, even if he couldn't yet put his finger on it. But Malik was careful. keeping his cover intact while he moved one step closer to cracking the case. One evening, while most of the employees had left, Malek sat alone at his desk, combing through the trove of evidence he'd gathered over the past few weeks. The pieces were beginning to form a clearer picture. Ethan had set up an elaborate network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and falsified financial records. Everything pointed to a massive money laundering scheme and embezzlement operation, with millions siphoned out of the company over the years. Malek knew he had more than enough for a case, but he wanted to leave no stone unturned. If he was going to bring Ethan down, he needed indisputable proof, something that would not only ruin Ethan's career, but also expose the toxic work culture he'd cultivated. The next day, Malek arrived at the office with a new plan. He was going to set a trap for Ethan, something that would force the CEO to reveal his crimes in front of witnesses. He had planted the idea of a fake client meeting that would require the CEO and his senior managers to discuss their offshore deals in person. By setting up a secure recording device in the conference room, Malek would capture every incriminating word. To lay the groundwork, Malek spent the morning sending out emails and organizing details for the meeting. He mentioned it casually to Ethan, framing it as a unique opportunity to gain new investors interested in the company's international reach. Ethan seemed intrigued but skeptical, watching Malek with a sharp, calculating expression. Malek met his gaze without flinching, knowing that every second of this interaction was part of the performance. "All right, Malek," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's see what you've got planned. Make sure everything is airtight." "Of course," Malek replied calmly. "I'll take care of everything." The date for the meeting was set, and Malek could feel the energy in the office shift as the event approached. Ethan's top lieutenants were buzzing with excitement, eager to impress their boss and these so-called new investors. Malek continued to play his part, coordinating details and making sure the conference room was ready for the big event. Meanwhile, he discreetly installed a hidden recording device beneath the conference table, positioning it to pick up every voice clearly. On the day of the meeting, Malek arrived early to make final preparations. Ethan and his senior team filed in, dressed to impress, their confidence palpable. They assumed this meeting would cement Altara's expansion efforts, unaware that Malek had no investors lined up, only his fellow FBI agents, listening from a safe distance. Malek took his place in the room, watching as the senior team exchanged smug smiles, their eyes glittering with ambition. The meeting began smoothly enough, with Ethan laying out Altara's strengths and speaking in his typical grandiose manner. Malek listened, waiting for the conversation to veer into dangerous territory. Finally, Ethan leaned forward, his voice lowering conspiratorially. "Now, let's talk about the real money," he said with a grin, looking around the table to make sure everyone was paying attention. "This isn't just about standard investments, people. It's about maintaining control. These accounts we've set up offshore are safety nets fee, they ensure we're never at risk. The investors get their piece, but we always keep ours." Malek's heart pounded as he watched the recording device pick up every word. Ethan was getting comfortable, too comfortable, and Malek knew this was his chance to push him further. "Ethan, just out of curiosity," Malek interjected smoothly, "how do you keep track of all these accounts? It must be quite the balancing act." Ethan chuckled, the sound dark and arrogant. "That's the beauty of it, Malek. You don't have to keep track when you control the system. A few numbers here, a few tweaks there, and nobody's the wiser. I've been running this game for years. If anyone questions the money, I just reclassify it. End of story." The senior managers laughed, some of them nodding in agreement, clearly reveling in the audacity of their leader. Malek felt a surge of disgust but kept his face impassive. He let Ethan and the others continue bragging, knowing that every word they spoke was digging their hole deeper. But just as the meeting seemed to reach its peak, Ethan suddenly turned his gaze toward Malek, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You know, Malek, you've been asking a lot of questions about this. More than I would expect from someone in your position." The room fell silent, and Malek could feel the tension settle over him like a heavy weight. He knew this moment would come, but he was ready. "I just want to understand how the company operates," Malek replied, his tone cool. "If I'm going to help Altara grow, I need to know all aspects of it." Ethan's eyes remained fixed on him, the faintest hint of doubt flickering there. But after a long moment, he seemed to dismiss his concerns with a wave of his hand. "Fair enough," he said, his smirk returning. "Just don't get too curious, Malek. Some things are above your pay grade." The meeting wrapped up shortly after, with Ethan's team leaving the room in high spirits, oblivious to the trap they had just walked into. Malek stayed behind, retrieving the recording device and ensuring the evidence was safely stored. He'd captured more than enough for an airtight case, but he knew he couldn't move yet. Ethan's suspicions, however small, or a danger he couldn't ignore. If he moved too quickly, he risked blowing his cover and jeopardizing everything he'd worked for. Over the next few days, Malik kept a low profile, avoiding any interaction with Ethan and his inner circle. He could feel the mounting pressure, the knowledge that every step could be his last if he wasn't careful. He kept to his work, biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, late one evening, as he was packing up to leave, Ethan's assistant appeared at his desk. "Ethan wants to see you," she said, her voice tight and wary. Malak nodded, following her down the hall to Ethan's office, his pulse steady. Inside, he found Ethan waiting, his expression cold and unreadable. "Close the door," Ethan said. Malak complied, standing across from the CEO, who watched him in silence for a long moment. "Do you think I'm an idiot, Malak?" Ethan asked, finally, his tone dangerously quiet. "Excuse me?" Malak replied, keeping his voice neutral. "I know you're up to something," Ethan continued, his eyes narrowing. "You've been poking around, asking questions, acting like you're in control. But I built this company from the ground up, and I won't let anyone come in here and disrupt it." Malak held his gaze, unflinching. "I'm just doing my job, Ethan." Ethan scoffed. "Your job? Don't insult my intelligence. You're not here for the company's benefit. You're here for yourself. But let me make one thing clear: you don't belong here. You never did. And if you don't back off, I'll make sure you regret it." Malak felt a surge of anger at Ethan's words, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to lose control now. "Understood," he said, his voice steady. Ethan's smirk returned, his satisfaction evident. "Good. Now go back to your work, and don't let me catch you snooping around again." Malak left the office, his mind racing. He'd known Ethan would confront him eventually, but the CEO's arrogance was more intense than he'd anticipated. It was clear now that Ethan wasn't just protecting his money, he was protecting his ego, his carefully constructed image as the untouchable leader. Malak knew he had to be smart, careful, and precise. One misstep, and Ethan's paranoia would put everything at risk. But as Malak walked back to his desk, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had seen enough, heard enough to know that Ethan's empire was built on a foundation of lies and exploitation. The time for patience was ending, and the moment of truth was drawing near. Malak prepared himself for the final phase of his plan, knowing that soon Ethan Brooks would face the full weight of his own actions. Malak was ready. The plan was in place, and the evidence he'd gathered was irrefutable. All he needed was the perfect opportunity to push Ethan over the edge, to finally get him to expose himself in front of the people who had remained loyal, complicit, or fearful in his presence. Malak had informed his team at the FBI they were ready to move in as soon as he gave the signal. But he knew that Ethan's arrogance would require one last confrontation, a chance for the CEO to flaunt his power, unaware of just how much he was about to lose. 2 days after their tense encounter, Malak arrived at the office to find a company-wide email announcing a critical team meeting. Ethan was summoning the entire senior management staff, and his words were as vague as they were ominous. Malak could feel a shift in the air. The employees were uneasy, exchanging worried glances as they speculated about the meeting's purpose. When the time came, Malak joined the others in the conference room, taking his seat among Ethan's most trusted lieutenants. Ethan entered, his presence as commanding as ever, though Malak could sense an undercurrent of tension in his movements. The CEO wasted no time, diving straight into a speech about loyalty, trust, and the importance of keeping outsiders from meddling in the company's business. "Altara is more than just a company," Ethan declared, his gaze sweeping over the room. "It's a family. And in a family, we don't betray each other. We don't question each other's motives." Malak kept his expression carefully neutral as Ethan's words continued, each one laced with an unspoken warning. It was clear that this speech was meant to intimidate, to remind everyone in the room that Ethan held all the power. But Malak was unshaken. He'd anticipated this tactic, knowing that Ethan would resort to fear-mongering the moment he felt his control slipping. Finally, Ethan's gaze settled on Malak, his eyes hard and unyielding. "Malak," he said, a faint sneer curling his lips, "you've been here long enough to understand how we operate. So let's put everything on the table. Do you believe in loyalty?" The room fell silent, every eye trained on Malak. He could feel the weight of their stares, the tension thickening with each passing second. This was the moment Ethan had been waiting for, a chance to make Malak declare his allegiance or his dissent. "Loyalty is essential," Malak replied evenly, his voice calm. "But I believe it should be earned, not forced." Ethan's sneer deepened, and a flicker of anger flashed in his eyes. Interesting perspective. "But you see, here at Altara, loyalty isn't a choice. It's a requirement. Malak met Ethan's gaze without flinching. Then I suppose I don't belong here. A murmur swept through the room, and Malik could see the shock and confusion on the faces of the other managers. Ethan's expression darkened, his face contorting with rage. This was not the response he'd expected, and it was clear that Malik's defiance had hit a nerve. "You think you can challenge me?" Ethan spat, his voice rising. "You and nobody who walked in here thinking you could question my authority. I built this company from the ground up, and I'll be damned if I let someone like you undermine me." Malak felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that Ethan's outburst was exactly what he'd been aiming for. He leaned forward, his tone controlled but firm. "The truth has a way of coming out, Ethan. And it looks like your time is up." Ethan's face turned red, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" He snarled. "Well, let me tell you something. This entire company is under my control. Every dollar, every decision, I own it all. And anyone who dares to cross me will regret it." A cold silence fell over the room as Ethan's words echoed. The senior managers shifted uncomfortably, clearly alarmed by their boss's unraveling composure. Malak knew he'd struck the final blow, and he could see that Ethan's confidence was beginning to crumble. The CEO had always thrived on power, but now, facing resistance for the first time, he was losing control. "Enough of this," Ethan spat, his voice laced with venom. "I want you out of my company. Right now." Malak nodded, rising from his seat, but he didn't move to leave. Instead, he pulled out his phone, pressed a button, and set it on the table, its screen lighting up as it began transmitting. A second later, the door to the conference room opened, and in walked two FBI agents, their badges gleaming as they approached Ethan. The room exploded into chaos, with employees gasping and scrambling to process what was happening. Ethan's face drained of color as he stared at the agents, his mind racing to understand. "Ethan Brooks," one of the agents announced, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud." Ethan's expression shifted from shock to fury, and he spun toward Malik, his voice shaking with rage. You did this. You set me up." Malak remained calm, his gaze steady as he faced the man who had spent weeks belittling and undermining him. "I didn't set you up, Ethan. I simply exposed the truth. You did this to yourself." The agents moved forward, and Ethan backed away, his bravado crumbling. He cast a desperate glance around the room, but none of his loyalists dared to come to his aid. In that moment, he was alone, his carefully constructed empire collapsing before his eyes. "You'll regret this, Malak," Ethan shouted as the agents cuffed him. "I'll make sure you pay." Malak shook his head, feeling a sense of closure as he watched Ethan's desperate threats dissolve into silence. "No, Ethan, it's over. You lost." The agents led Ethan out of the room, leaving the stunned employees in a state of shock. Malak turned to the remaining managers, their faces pale with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "For those of you who stayed silent, who enabled this behavior," Malak said, his voice firm but calm, "I hope you understand what happens when you allow corruption to go unchecked. Altera can still be saved, but it will take honesty and accountability." He gave them a final look, seeing the weight of his words settle on each face. They knew that the culture Ethan had created had poisoned the company, and it would take effort to rebuild it from the ground up. As Malik left the conference room, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The case was closed, and he had done what he had set out to do. Exposing Ethan Brooks had been more than just an investigation. It had been a test of Malik's resolve, his patience, and his belief in justice. The news of Ethan's arrest spread quickly, and by the time Malik reached the lobby, reporters were already gathering, eager to get the story. But Malik kept his head down, slipping past the crowd without a word. This was not about fame or recognition, it was about holding people accountable, about standing up against those who thought they were untouchable. In the days that followed, Altara was thrown into turmoil. The board of directors scrambled to repair the damage, launching an internal investigation and promising to implement changes that would foster a healthier, more transparent workplace. Malak knew it would take time, but he hoped that his actions had planted the seeds of transformation. As he walked away from the Altara building for the last time, Malak felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had faced down a corrupt leader, endured disrespect and isolation, and emerged victorious. And though the scars of the experience would linger, he knew he had done the right thing. His phone buzzed with a message from his FBI supervisor, congratulating him on a job well done and offering him some much-needed time off. Malak smiled, feeling a rare moment of peace as he turned away from the office that had once been a place of hostility and challenge. It was time to move on, to the next case, the next challenge. In the aftermath of Ethan's arrest, Altara was in shock. The employees, once swept up in the CEO's bravado and domineering presence, were left to grapple with the reality of his crimes. Whispers circulated in the halls, and the stunned faces of those who'd loyally followed Ethan's every word seemed to echo with confusion, shame, and disbelief. Senior managers who had previously mocked Malek or dismissed him outright now moved through the office with uneasy glances and quiet tones, as though afraid they might be next to face justice. Malak returned to the office the following day, not as an outsider or a powerless manager, but as the man who had revealed the truth. He hadn't planned on staying longer, but he'd been asked by the board of directors to temporarily assist with the transition and ensure that Altara could recover from its darkest chapter. The board, though initially defensive when they first learned about Ethan's actions, now understood the gravity of what had transpired and was desperate to restore the company's tarnished reputation. Malak was careful, moving through the office without gloating or drawing unnecessary attention. He understood that many employees had been caught up in the culture Ethan had cultivated, and he wanted to extend a path forward rather than fuel further animosity. Altara's future, he realized, would depend on its ability to rebuild trust both internally and externally. And for that, the employees needed to see a different kind of leadership. In his first meeting as interim operations lead, Malek gathered the remaining managers and key department heads in the same conference room where Ethan had once reigned supreme. Gone were the arrogance and sneering superiority. The room was filled with weary faces, the excitement and drive that had once defined the startup dimmed by the revelations of corruption. Malak looked around, giving each person a moment to meet his gaze. He could see that some were genuinely remorseful, while others still wore guarded expressions, uncertain of what would come next. "Thank you all for being here," Malek began, his voice calm and steady. "I know the past few days have been difficult. Many of you may feel betrayed or uncertain about what's next, and that's understandable. But let me be clear, Altara can still be a company worth believing in. The actions of a few don't define everyone here, and they don't have to define our future." The managers shifted, some nodding, others avoiding his eyes. Malek continued, his tone unwavering. "Rebuilding Altara won't be easy. Trust has been broken, and that kind of damage takes time to repair. But if we're willing to face the truth, to take responsibility, we can create a culture here that values integrity, respect, and transparency." One of the department heads, a woman named Clara, who had often been a vocal supporter of Ethan, spoke up, her voice hesitant. "How do we even begin to change things? Ethan controlled everything. He set the tone for all of us." Malak nodded, acknowledging her doubt. "It's true. Ethan created an environment where speaking up was discouraged, and questioning authority was seen as betrayal. But it's time we dismantle that mindset. Effective leadership isn't about control. It's about building an environment where people feel valued and where ethical practices are the foundation of our work." Another manager, a young man named Luke who had been quiet since the scandal broke, raised his hand. "What about the financial damage? Will Altara even survive this?" Malak addressed him with the same calm. "The financial implications are serious, yes. But the board has already started taking steps to stabilize the company. We're cutting ties with the shell companies and reviewing all vendor contracts to eliminate any remaining ties to the fraud. This won't be an overnight fix, but Altara's core business remains strong. If we show our clients and investors that we're committed to ethical practices, we have a real chance of moving forward." The room was silent, each person absorbing the gravity of his words. Malek could feel the weight of their fear, their anger, and even their guilt. Ethan had fostered a culture where loyalty was weaponized, where people feared repercussions for speaking out. Now, with their former leader exposed, they were left to face the uncomfortable reality of their complicity, whether intentional or not. As the meeting ended, Malak sensed a shift. The managers left the room with a newfound determination, small but real. He knew that some would need more time to come to terms with the events, but he also knew that he'd planted the seeds for change. Rebuilding Altara's culture would be a gradual process, but it was a start. In the days that followed, Malek implemented a series of changes aimed at dismantling the toxic hierarchy Ethan had established. He instituted regular open forums where employees could voice concerns without fear of retaliation, and he encouraged transparency in every decision, big or small. Slowly, the employees began to see that Malek was not there to punish or condemn them, but to help them rebuild. One afternoon, as Malek was going over restructuring plans, Erin, the young analyst who had privately apologized to him weeks earlier, knocked on his office door. She entered cautiously, her expression one of relief mixed with lingering guilt. "Hi, Malek," she began, her voice tentative. "I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. I know I was scared to speak up before, and I still feel bad about it. Malak offered her a reassuring smile. You did more than you realize, Aaron. Even a small act of kindness makes a difference. And you weren't alone. It was a hard environment for anyone to stand up in. Aaron nodded, visibly comforted. I think we all just got so used to how things were that we stopped questioning it. But seeing what you did, how you stood up against Ethan, it reminded me that we can change things if we really want to. Malak placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression warm. That's the idea. We're building a place where no one has to feel afraid or ignored again. And you're a part of that. As Aaron left his office, Malak felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that his time at Altera was temporary, that he'd eventually move on to another assignment, another case. But for now, he was committed to ensuring that the company he'd helped expose could also be given the chance to rise above its past. The board of directors, now more aware than ever of the risks of unchecked leadership, also threw their support behind Malek's efforts. They began working closely with him to revise policies, increase oversight, and create safeguards against the abuses that Ethan had normalized. The journey was far from easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but Malak's steady hand guided them forward. In time, the changes Malak implemented began to bear fruit. Employees reported higher morale, the once fractured departments started to collaborate more openly, and the oppressive silence that had once dominated the office was replaced by a renewed energy. People were no longer afraid to share ideas, to question decisions, or to challenge each other respectfully. Altara was, for the first time, becoming a true team. One day, as he walked through the office, Malak overheard a conversation between two employees discussing a project they'd been struggling with. They spoke openly, sharing ideas and debating approaches without the fear of being dismissed or undermined. Malak smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. This was the culture he had envisioned, the kind of environment that empowered people to be their best selves. As his tenure at Altara came to an end, Malak gathered the staff for a final meeting. Standing before them, he looked out at the faces of people who had once doubted him, dismissed him, and even resented his presence. But now they looked at him with respect, gratitude, and a sense of unity. Thank you all for your hard work, your resilience, and your willingness to embrace change, Malak said, his voice filled with warmth. What we've built here isn't perfect, but it's a foundation. And with the right intentions, it will grow into something we can all be proud of. The employees applauded, their smiles genuine and unguarded. As Malak walked out of the building for the last time, he felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond any case or assignment. He had not only exposed corruption but had also helped foster a new beginning for those who remained. Outside, Malak looked back at the Altara building, its sleek glass exterior reflecting the city skyline. He knew that his work was far from over. There would always be another case, another company in need of accountability. But he also knew that he'd left something meaningful behind, a legacy that would continue to grow long after he was gone. As he headed down the street, his phone buzzed with a new assignment from his FBI supervisor, a reminder that his role in justice and integrity was ongoing. Malak put the phone away, a quiet determination in his eyes. He was ready for whatever came next, knowing that his purpose was clear and unwavering. Months after Malak's departure from Altara, the company had undergone a transformation. Malak's efforts to uproot the toxic culture Ethan Brooks had nurtured were taking hold, and the new management had continued implementing policies focused on transparency, collaboration, and ethical conduct. Altara was still recovering from the financial and reputational damage of the scandal, but it was clear that the employees, now free from the shadow of their former leader, were beginning to believe in the company's potential for change. For Malak, life had returned to a steady rhythm with new cases and new challenges. He'd been recognized within the bureau for his work at Altara, earning respect from his peers and supervisors alike. But the recognition wasn't what drove him. Malak thrived on the pursuit of justice, the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd made a difference, even if only a few knew the depth of his contribution. One afternoon, as Malak was reviewing files in his office, his phone rang. The call was from Clara, one of the senior managers at Altara who had once been a strong supporter of Ethan but had eventually embraced the reforms Malak introduced. Malak answered, curious about the unexpected call. Clara, he greeted her warmly. Good to hear from you. How's everything going at Altara? Better than ever, thanks to you, Clara replied, her voice filled with gratitude. I just wanted to reach out and let you know we've taken all of the changes you suggested to heart. It's a different place now, Malak. I'm not sure we ever really thanked you properly. Malak chuckled, leaning back in his chair. No thanks needed. You all did the hard work. I just set things in motion. Maybe, but it was a motion we desperately needed, she continued. In fact, we've been invited to speak at an industry conference about corporate transparency. I never would have imagined Altera being a model for that sort of thing. That's great to hear, Malik said, genuinely pleased. It sounds like Altera is on a strong path. After a few more words of encouragement, Clara hung up, leaving Malik with a sense of pride for the lasting impact he'd left on the company. But his satisfaction was tempered by the understanding that not every case would end as successfully as Altara. For every corporation that turned itself around, there were countless others where greed and exploitation still reigned. And Malik's job, his calling, was to keep fighting, to keep uncovering those hidden layers of corruption wherever they festered. A week later, Malik found himself on assignment in a different city, working undercover at a manufacturing company with a suspicious pattern of labor violations and tax evasion. The company's senior executives were a world apart from the tech startup world of Altara, but the core of their misconduct was all too familiar. Malik had seen it time and time again, powerful individuals manipulating systems for personal gain at the expense of employees, customers, or even public resources. As he settled into the rhythms of his new role, Malik used the lessons he'd learned at Altara. He paid careful attention to the dynamics in the workplace, noting how upper management maintained a culture of fear, using every opportunity to remind the employees of their expendability. Whispers of missing overtime pay, unsafe working conditions, and sudden layoffs hung over the workers like a storm cloud. Malik moved through it all with quiet determination, keeping his true identity hidden as he gathered information, waiting for the right moment to bring everything to light. But even as he worked to uncover new layers of corruption, Malik couldn't shake the impact Altara had left on him. His time there had underscored how deeply workplace culture could affect people, how the actions of those at the top trickled down to shape the attitudes and morale of everyone involved. At Altara, he had watched people go from defenders of a toxic leader to advocates of transparency, and he realized that transformation wasn't just possible, it was necessary for true justice to prevail. Several weeks into his new assignment, Malik received another unexpected message, this time from Aaron, the young analyst at Altara, who had once offered him a quiet apology amidst the hostility. She'd been one of the first to approach him with empathy, and he remembered her courage despite the toxic environment Ethan had created. Aaron's email was brief but heartfelt. Hi Malik. I hope this message finds you well. I just wanted to let you know that your time at Altara changed things for a lot of us. The new management is building on the foundation you helped set, and for the first time I feel like I'm part of something worth believing in. I even spoke out in a meeting last week about a policy change, and no one dismissed me, they actually listened. I'm not sure I ever would have had the courage to do that before. Thank you for everything. You left more than just a company behind you, left a legacy. Best, Aaron. Malik read the message twice, feeling a swell of gratitude for her words. It was a reminder that his work went beyond just exposing crimes. It was about leaving lasting change, giving people the tools, and the confidence to stand up for what was right even after he was gone. That evening, Malik took a walk through the city, letting the cool night air clear his mind. His journey as an undercover agent was often solitary, but knowing he had touched lives in meaningful ways grounded him, giving him strength to continue on his path. There would always be another Altara, another place in need of transformation, and he was ready for whatever came next. Returning to his hotel, Malik opened his laptop to review the next day's tasks, but he found himself pausing, reflecting on the people he'd met at Altara. He thought about the difference he'd made there and the difference he could make wherever he went. The emails from Clara and Aaron reminded him that his role was more than just uncovering the worst in people, it was about helping them find their best, too. With a sense of purpose renewed, Malik closed his laptop and prepared for the next day. The fight for justice and integrity was endless, but he was ready. As he lay down to rest, he felt at peace, knowing that wherever he went, he would carry with him the legacy of Altara, a reminder that even in the darkest places change was possible. And with that knowledge, Malik Grant drifted into sleep, ready for the next chapter in his journey toward justice.